let's talk about autumnal books. Hi, I'm Colleen Delaney. If you're new here, I talk about books and writing. In the description, I always put links to my newsletter and some of the books I've written. Today, I'm going to throw a couple extra videos down there for you all, and here's why. I do some version of this video every year, I think, and this might be my third or fourth year. I honestly can't remember how many years I've been doing BookTube, but when I was going through my list, I try to do almost all new books every year, and a lot of my favorite autumn books I've already talked about. So this is a little bit of a shorter list than normal, and because of that, I'm going to put in the description links to the other videos I've done in past years, which will have like a little bit of bulkier lists if you want to hear about more recommendations throughout the years. I've also decided at the end of this video, I'm going to do my historical favorite autumn reads, not meaning historical fiction, but meaning like what my favorite books were to read in autumn when I was like a kid, a teen, in my 20s, etc. Just to make it a little fun. Okay, we're gonna start with a book I actually just read. So if you watched my July wrap up, you probably saw it, and it's called Apple Crush by Lucy Nisley, I think is how you say her last name. I got this from the library, so I don't have a copy of it with me anymore, which is too bad because the illustrations in this graphic novel are phenomenal. It's a middle grade graphic novel, and we follow Jen, who's our main character, and Jen has recently moved from the city to the country after her parents got divorced. This is the second book in a series. I didn't read the first book. It was fine. You don't have to read the first one. But it's just like a beautifully illustrated, all the autumn feels you could imagine, story of what it's like to be in sixth grade and sort of feel like you don't have a place anywhere. Jen's mom has a new serious boyfriend. She feels like the third wheel with them. Jen's two best friends are now kind of romantically involved. She feels like a third wheel with them. Her little sister has a new best friend. So it's just all these things where she feels kind of excluded from areas of her life where she used to feel very included, all set in a backdrop of an amazing fall festival that's going on at a farm that Jen is helping to set up and then work at. And it's very sweet. And it's one of those books you could read in like 2 days if you just want to feel super cozy. And then continuing with middle grade graphic novels in particular, I also read Ghost Book by Remy Lay. And also I returned this to the library. This is if you want to read a middle grade graphic novel that's a little bit more spooky. So if either you or your child is looking for something with more of like the Halloween-y vibes, it's about a girl and a boy who kind of, one was supposed to die at birth and didn't, and now that boy is constantly having near-death experiences. And they are going through this like world on top of our world where there are hungry ghosts coming after them. And it was really fun. It was another really fast read. You read it really quickly, but if you're looking for something that's like cozy, spooky, because obviously it's middle grade, it's not going to be that scary. This was a very fun read. Now we're done with children's until we get to the section at the end where I talk about my historical favorites. But next is The Woman in the Library by Sulari Gentill. I read this, I was trying to remember if I read this last year or 2 years ago, but I got the ARC for it, so I don't have a copy of it. But it's a mystery that on the surface seems kind of commonplace. It's about a group of people who are at the Boston Public Library when a murder takes place, and they're all sort of trying to figure out who did it. But then the flip side of that is that every once in a while you're getting notes from a critique partner. The author is sending chapters to this person who lives in Boston, and then they're sending them feedback, and the feedback starts to get really creepy. And so that part of the story really draws you in, and you get to the point where you're not even really that interested in the main mystery. What you want to know is going on with the author and this other person. So I really enjoyed that. It was a very inventive way to write a mystery. And then another mystery I have that I have talked about this woman constantly, and that is The Seduction of Water by Carol Goodman. I love Carol Goodman so much. I have so many of her books on my shelf over there. I don't have this one anymore. This is one that I think I either lent it to someone or it got damaged, but it was the first Carol Goodman I ever read, The Seduction of Water. I got it in hardcover for my 21st birthday, I think, or my 20th birthday. I should look up what year it came out and then I could be able to figure it out. And it kicked off a lifelong love of this author. So this one kind of straddles dark academia. I didn't put it on my dark academia list. A lot of Carol Goodman's books are straightforward dark academia. They take place at boarding schools or colleges. This one does not. This one is about a writer, and she is the daughter of like a famous author who died in a fire. And this woman, her name is Iris, she is writing kind of like a creepy fairy tale about selkies. And I love selkies, which is the entire reason I my mom bought this book for me because she knew how much I loved Selkies, and then I ended up really loving this mystery author. But you follow her kind of trying to like find maybe one last manuscript her mother wrote while she's also writing her creepy story. And then she also teaches writing classes at a prison, and she has a romance with one of the former inmates. And I really loved it. I think it's a very good, fun, spooky autumn read. You're also in the Catskills, which are a perfect setting for this kind of story. Okay, so now we're gonna switch gears away from mystery and into fantasy, and that is The Invisible Hour by Alice Hoffman. If you watch this channel, you know how much I love Alice Hoffman, like so much. I think she's a phenomenal writer, and this was her new book last year. I read it, I believe in September, I think is when it came out, because I read it almost immediately. Nothing says autumn like that cover. I mean, that red hair, the wheat field, you can see some changing leaves in the background, gorgeous. Okay, so this book, not unlike most Alice Hoffman books, sounds a little strange when you describe it. And it is fantasy. It's not magical realism, because most of Alice Hoffman's stuff is magical realism. This one is definitely fantasy. So we start with Ivy, and it's all, another thing I liked about this book is you're not actually sure like when you are. And Ivy definitely seemed older than me in terms of her high school experience, but she gets pregnant, and then she kind of gets taken in by a cult. Like, she's very much run out of options, and this cult takes her in. And then we follow her daughter, Mia, escaping the cult, and how her time at the public library, and specifically her time with the book, The Scarlet Letter, gives her the confidence to get away from this bad life. That's what the first half of the book is about. The second half of the book, Nathaniel Hawthorne, the author of The Scarlet Letter, is a main character. And so is Mia at the same time. And, you know, you think it's like the 2000s at some point. So it's definitely fantasy, but I will tell you how good this book was. So I really like classics a lot. I mean, I majored in English literature in college. I loved all my lit classes in high school. I really didn't like The Scarlet Letter, like at all. I took a class on the Transcendentalists and the Concord Writers, and Nathaniel Hawthorne was one of the people we studied, and I read a lot of like his letters and stuff to his wife. I did really enjoy that portion of his life, and like I just really didn't like The Scarlet Letter. And this book made me want to reread The Scarlet Letter, so that's how good this book is. That's the kind of magic that The Invisible Hour had over me. I didn't reread The Scarlet Letter. There's too much stuff that I haven't read yet that I want to read, but it made me want to. So good for you, Alice Hoffman. You're amazing. And now we're going to switch to one that's like fantasy romance, and that is called To the Deep by Desiree M. Nickley. And this is about a woman named Lorelei who is on a boat with like a research expedition, and there's like a horrible tragedy. And she's the only one who survives, and she gets picked out of the water by this man, Killian, who's a boat captain. And then Lorelei notices that like she suddenly starts to change. She's having like weird cravings and weird impulses. And what is happening is that she is a mermaid who has been living on land and has not been in salt water. And now it's like awoken her. And it's a really fun book. So it's the first two books in the series, the third one just came out, are kind of duology-y because they follow Lorelei and Killian together over, I don't remember exactly how many months. This takes place in October in Maine, so you get like all the great fall vibes of Maine in autumn, which is amazing. The newest book that just came out is a spin-off sort of a main character who's in these two books. And I don't know if my September TBR has come out yet or not because I haven't decided which order in which I'm releasing these videos, but it's on my TBR for September. But if you want something that's like fantasy, romance, autumn, Maine, grab Called to the Deep. And then lastly, before we move on to my historical picks, I do have to be a good author and tell you to buy Something Wicked, which is a book I wrote under my contemporary romance pen name, which is Lucy Hudson. This is about a woman named Ginger and how she meets a man named Caden at the beginning of the summer and how they sort of hit it off, but then she finds out he doesn't like autumn and they live in New Hampshire. And so she decides to take him on a month's worth of autumnal dates. And it's very cozy and very Hallmarky. Like if you could imagine a Hallmark movie, but like they bang at the end. That's what this is. So now let's talk about my favorite autumnal reads as a kid. And the reason I thought of this is because particularly this summer, I started thinking a lot about the books that sort of like exploded my reading, mainly because my sixth grader is a very reluctant reader, and he had some summer reading to get done, which has been just a terrible struggle. And he hasn't wanted to do any of it. And school started 2 days ago, and he is 75% done with the last book. But his teacher said he had 3 more days to finish. He'll get it done. But it started making me think about the books that really made me fall in love with reading, and in particular series. And when I was thinking about that, I was like, oh, so for 2 periods of my life, there were 2 actually really autumnally things that made me fall in love with reading. So we're going to start with the fact that when I was in 4th grade, I became obsessed with the Fear Street books, not Goosebumps, Fear Street by R.L. Stein. And I can't believe I read these in 4th grade because these movies came out recently and I think they're too scary for me to watch now. But I loved these books in 4th grade. And there was like this ring of girls in my grade where everyone would be able to buy like 1 or 2, and then we would just pass them around until they were basically like the pages were falling out. And I don't remember a ton of the plot lines, but I know they were always high school students. And someone was always like getting murdered or getting stalked and occasionally robbed, but I think it was mostly more violent than that. But they're very, I know, what was wrong with me? So I was like 9 years old. I have an almost 9-year-old. She'd be terrified of this stuff. I mean, my 11-year-old would be terrified of this stuff. But basically, I don't even know. I went through Amazon. There's like 30 of these books. I don't think I read 30, but I bet I read like 15-ish. I don't have a particular one to recommend, just those books I loved. I do, if you have watched the Fear Street movies, please in the comments tell me how scary they are. Because like I, as a general rule, don't watch horror movies because I am a scaredy cat. But like I can watch movies that are like a little scary. Like I can watch like, you know, a fantasy or sci-fi that's a little scary, not like Alien. That's too scary. I can't even think of a scary movie I've watched recently. Like, they're not really scary, but I watch like the Underworld movies. The Mummy has a lot of jump scares in it. I can handle that. I just can't handle like full on horror. So if you've seen those movies, tell me, 1, are they just way too scary? Or 2, is there one in particular that's maybe not as scary that you can recommend to me? Thank you. Next, in middle school, so this was probably when I was like, I think this was like end of 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. I got really into Anne Rinaldi, who's a historical fiction author for like middle grade to young adult. In particular, American historical fiction. I think she's written like 1 or 2 that take place in Europe, but she's mostly American history. And I was talking about this with my son. Part of the reason I think I did so well in my American history classes in 7th and 8th grade was because of this, because I already had like touch points for these like major American events. But her book, A Break with Charity, is about the Salem witch trials, which is very autumnal. And I remember, the interesting thing when I think back about these books is I don't remember the plots that well, but I remember the ones I loved. And I loved A Break with Charity, Salem witch trials. I loved The 5th of March, which is about the Boston Massacre. I loved Wolf by the Ears, which is about one of Thomas Jefferson's children who he had with the slave woman that he was abusing. And I loved, I'm gonna forget what it was, Stitch in Time, I think is what it was called. Yeah, Stitch in Time. Then when I actually went back to work at the indie bookstore and was working in the children's department, Anne Rinaldi released a few more and they were great. Like The Letter Writer, Juliet's Moon, she released some more that were really good. So I do think she's a fantastic author, but in particular, if you want something autumnal, A Break with Charity was a great like middle grade YA read about the Salem witch trials. Then let's move into high school. And in high school, I read mostly my schoolwork because I did take pretty demanding classes and I also was on dance company and ran cross country and track. So I didn't have a lot of time for like fun reading, but I did read, and then there were none several times for classes. And I think one's for fun. And that's a great mystery. Like if you just want like a great, I think that's probably Agatha Christie's best mystery. I don't know. I haven't read that many. I should defer to one of my good friends who's read almost all of her mysteries. That's my favorite that Agatha Christie has written, and then there were none. I think it's very clever, and I think it's even, you know, that's like feels a little bit old fashioned now, that it still is written in a way that is very interesting to read. Now moving to college, during which I did still have very heavy coursework, but I began reading for fun more because I wasn't like a party girl. So, you know, Friday night I was, you know, mostly staying home. That's when I read Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman, and my roommate, who's still one of my best friends, introduced me to both Neverwhere and American Gods and was like, you need to read these books, you'd really like them. I really loved Neverwhere, in particular because I read it right after I'd gotten home from studying abroad in London. And so I was very familiar with like the tube. And if you are not familiar with Neverwhere, it's kind of about another city that's below London, like an undercity. And the tube stops are kind of like different villages or touch points in the layout. And it's a very, very good read. I'd recommend it to anyone who hasn't read it. I went through like a phase where I was really like Neil Gaiman. I read everything he came out with, and then I haven't read any of his new stuff the last few years. I feel like I just kind of like outgrew that particular subgenre of fantasy. But I do think Neverwhere's a fantastic read, especially if you're looking for something that feels a little bit fallish. And then lastly, I had to throw in my 20s. So when I was in my 20s, I worked at an indie bookstore for a big chunk of them. And then I ended up working at schools for a while. But I worked at an indie bookstore during the Twilight craze. The whole thing, like, I was working there when we got the ARC for Twilight. I remember the woman who ran our young adult department saying to me, this is going to be huge. And we used to do that to each other. And I said it about the Hunger Games, which I'm like so proud of myself, that I was like, this is going to be a huge book. They're going to teach it in schools. And when she read Twilight, she was also a 7th and 8th grade English teacher. She said, this book is going to explode. And man, was she right. And then we had a midnight party that I was in charge of for the release of Breaking Dawn, which was very fun. So I had to throw those on. I literally the other day said to my husband, oh, I was just reading that if we watch the first Twilight movie on the last Friday in August, that the last Friday in September, we will watch the second Breaking Dawn. Like, we'll have watched the entire series. And he looked at me and said, what a weird way to tell me there's 5 movies in the Twilight series. So last year I made him watch the first 2 with me, mainly because his commentary is so funny. It makes me laugh hysterically, but we never finished. And I've actually never seen Eclipse or the 2 Breaking Dawns because I just didn't like those books as much as the first 2 books. And, but this year we're going to do it. So if you follow me on Twitter, I always live tweet his reactions, which is very fun. And that is everything I have for you today. So if any of those books sounded good, please let me know in the comments. If you have a autumnal read that either you're super excited about for this year or that is like your classic, you read it every September, October, also let me know. And if you've read, the Fear Street books, Anne Rinaldi, any of those things, I always love to chat about books from times past. It's super fun. If you made it this far and you don't want to write words, but you want to let me know that you made it, why don't you give me one of the fall leaves? We're getting there now. It's the end of August. It's been really cold here the last couple days. Like, my kids have had to wear sweatshirts in the morning to school. And then by midday, it hits about 70. But then next week, we're going to be hitting the mid 90s every day. So we're going to have one more week of really intense hot summer. But it's been kind of nice and fallish the last few days here. So I've been getting into it. And as always, I hope you're in the middle of a good book, about to start reading a good book, or about to start writing a great book. I'll see you soon.